Before the sun even came up over the mountains of Jalisco, Mexico, 6 military helicopters were cutting through the dark sky toward a remote compound hidden in the hills outside Tapalpa. On the ground, Army Special Forces units were moving in silence through the brush surrounding the property from every angle. They'd been tracking this moment for months, years actually, and what was about to go down in the next few hours would end the reign of the most feared, most hunted, most dangerous man in the Western Hemisphere. But here's what you need to understand before we get there. Most cartels in Mexico operate by one unwritten rule. Do not directly challenge the military, stay low, bribe officials, move in the shadows, avoid attention at all costs. El Mencho read that rulebook and threw it straight in the trash. Analysts say CJNG's violence was not random. It was deliberate and performative, engineered to dominate rivals fast and make anyone who thought about resisting reconsider. One analyst told Al Jazeera directly, the CJNG normalized the worst horrors of the Mexican drug war: bodies hanging from lampposts, decapitated heads left on the side of the road. That was shocking news a generation ago. Under El Mencho, it became almost a daily occurrence, and that was by design. This is the story of a war between a cartel and a government, a decade-long clash that played out in burning helicopters, massacred police convoys, assassination attempts in broad daylight, and finally, a pre-dawn raid in the mountains of Jalisco that ended with the most wanted man in Mexico bleeding out on a military helicopter. Let's get into it. To understand how this war got to where it ended, you gotta understand who Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes actually was, because this wasn't some guy who was born into cartel royalty. His story starts much more humble than that. El Mencho grew up dirt poor in Aguililla, Michoacan, a small rural town where his family grew avocados. He dropped out of school young, immigrated illegally to California in the 1980s, and got himself into the drug game early. By 1994, he was convicted in the Northern District of California for conspiracy to distribute heroin and sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. He did his time, got deported back to Mexico, and here's where it gets wild. He became a cop. No cap. A federally convicted heroin trafficker got deported back to Mexico and got a job as a police officer in Cabo Corrientes, Jalisco. That experience gave him something most cartel bosses never had: a first-hand understanding of how law enforcement thinks, operates, and responds. He learned their playbook from the inside, and when he eventually left the police to join the Milenio cartel, he took all of that knowledge with him. After working his way up through the Milenio cartel under the Nava Valencia brothers, El Mencho found himself in the perfect position when that organization started collapsing around 2009 and 2010. Key leaders were getting arrested or killed. The structure was fracturing, and instead of going down with the ship, El Mencho seized the chaos and co-founded an entirely new organization, the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, the CJNG. From the jump, CJNG was built differently. El Mencho recruited heavily from former military and former police. He built a paramilitary structure, not a street gang with guns, but a disciplined, hierarchical fighting force with military-grade weapons, tactical training, and a willingness to go to war with anyone, including the Mexican government itself. That wasn't an accident. That was the strategy. The DEA has estimated CJNG grew its total assets to somewhere around $50 billion. That's not a typo. $50 billion. That kind of money doesn't just buy drugs. It buys weapons, it buys politicians, it buys military equipment, and most importantly, it buys silence. But El Mencho wasn't interested in silence. He was interested in dominance. And dominance meant making a statement so loud that nobody, not rival cartels, not the Mexican military, not the United States government, would dare come for him without knowing the cost. That philosophy was about to get tested in the most dramatic way possible. Now, to really understand this conflict, we gotta rewind to how things were in Mexico before CJNG became the force it turned into. From 2006 to 2012, the Mexican government under President Felipe Calderón ran what they called a hardline military offensive against the cartels, specifically targeting cartel leadership in a strategy called decapitation. Take out the bosses, and the organizations collapse. In theory, it sounds solid. In practice, it created a monster. Every time a leader went down, it triggered a power vacuum, and those power vacuums bred fragmentation, and that fragmentation bred more violence. The number of cartels multiplied. New groups formed constantly. The Zetas got more brutal. The Knights Templar took over Michoacán. And somewhere in all that chaos, CJNG was growing. By 2012, CJNG had already established operations from coast to coast across Mexico. They were moving cocaine, methamphetamine, and heroin on a scale that was drawing serious DEA attention, but they were still relatively new. They hadn't fully declared war on the government yet. That was about to change. In August 2012, Mexican federal police launched an operation in Guadalajara, specifically targeting CJNG. They were trying to catch El Mencho. What happened instead was a preview of what CJNG would do every time the government came looking. The cartel formed dozens of vehicle blockades across the city, setting fire to trucks and buses on major roads, giving their members time to escape. El Mencho got away. The government had underestimated him. They wouldn't make that mistake for much longer. Meanwhile, CJNG was handling their rivals just as aggressively. They launched a campaign to drive the Zetas out of Veracruz, operating under the name Los Mata Zetas, the Zeta Killers. They literally made videos posting them next to the bodies of Zeta members. They were announcing themselves to the world. And when the Knights Templar started losing their grip on Michoacán, CJNG moved in on that territory too. Within just a few years, they had gone from a regional organization to a nationwide force, with international drug trafficking connections spanning the Americas, Europe, and Asia. By 2014, the United States was paying serious attention. The U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia indicted El Mencho on charges of drug trafficking and running a continuing criminal enterprise. El Mencho and his organization were accused of coordinating cocaine and methamphetamine shipments from South America through Mexico into the United States. They were putting cartel cash into submarine vessels, into frozen shark carcasses, into semi-trucks with hidden compartments. Whatever it took to move product. The indictment didn't slow them down one bit. This is important because by 2015, El Mencho had built something the Mexican government had never really dealt with before, a cartel with a military wing that was actually capable of going to war with the state on the state's own terms. And in the spring of 2015, El Mencho proved it. April 2015, Jalisco. A convoy of Mexican police officers is moving along a mountain road. It's a routine patrol, or at least they thought it was. CJNG had already set the trap. They blocked the road ahead with burning vehicles. The convoy slows, the officers stop, and then from every angle, CJNG opened up on them. Machine guns, grenade launchers, military-grade weapons turning a mountain road in Jalisco into a killing field. When it was over, 15 Mexican police officers were dead. 5 more were seriously wounded. It was one of the single deadliest attacks on security forces in modern Mexican history. The Mexican government lost their mind. This wasn't just cartel-on-cartel violence. This was an open declaration of war against the state itself. President Enrique Peña Nieto went on record demanding CJNG be dismantled, the military mobilized, and on May 1st, 2015, they launched a massive operation in Villa Purificación, Jalisco, directly targeting El Mencho's location. Here's where it gets real, because what CJNG did on May 1st, 2015 changed the history of Mexico's drug war permanently. Before dawn, an armed CJNG convoy was moving through dirt roads in the mountains, with their headlights completely off, trying to avoid detection from Mexican Air Force helicopters doing aerial surveillance of the area. One of the vehicles in that convoy was carrying a Russian-made RPG-27 rocket launcher. Let that sink in. A cartel with a Russian military rocket launcher. As the military helicopters flew over the convoy, CJNG opened fire. A Cougar EC-725, a military-grade helicopter carrying 18 people, took an RPG round directly to its tail section. The helicopter spun in the air multiple times trying to correct itself before falling and exploding on impact. 9 soldiers died. The gunman fired 6 rockets total and tried to take down a second helicopter, narrowly missing it. 9 soldiers. Killed by a rocket launcher, on Mexican soil, by a drug cartel. The Mexican government itself acknowledged that this was the first time in history that a criminal organization in Mexico had successfully shot down a military aircraft. That's not just a drug war statistic. That's a line that had never been crossed anywhere in the country's history. And CJNG crossed it like it was nothing. But El Mencho wasn't finished that day. Not even close. While the military was dealing with the downed helicopter, CJNG activated across the entire state simultaneously. They hijacked 39 buses, trucks, and private cars throughout western Mexico, set them on fire, and used them to block roads and highways across multiple states. Gas stations burned, banks burned, businesses burned. The second largest city in Mexico, Guadalajara, was brought to a standstill. The Mexican president personally went on Twitter to promise the public that CJNG would be dismantled. They weren't. That's the part that matters. Because what May 1st, 2015 really proved wasn't just that CJNG was dangerous, it proved that CJNG was capable of shutting down an entire state in retaliation for any government action against them. The calculus for the Mexican military changed that day. Every operation against El Mencho now came with a price tag the government had to be willing to pay. And for years, they weren't. El Mencho disappeared back into the mountains of Jalisco. The DEA increased their reward for information leading to his arrest. The Mexican government shuffled resources, and CJNG kept growing. Fast forward through the next several years, and El Mencho basically became a myth. No confirmed sightings, no photos, no public appearances. By 2022, Insight Crime, one of the most respected organized crime research outlets in the world, reported that El Mencho had not actually been seen in years, and that there were serious concerns about his health. He had kidney disease. He had allegedly built a private hospital in the village of El Alcihuatl, just to treat himself without having to surface publicly. The DEA had a $15 million bounty on his head, the highest reward they'd ever offered for a cartel figure, and nobody could collect it. But even while hiding, his cartel kept acting. In 2019, CJNG rolled into Uruapan, Michoacán, and killed 19 members of a rival group called Los Viagras. They left the bodies in a public square. They weren't trying to hide. They wanted everyone to see. And then, in June 2020, El Mencho ordered one of the most audacious attacks in Mexican drug war history. Mexico City, the capital, the heart of the country's government and security apparatus. CJNG operatives ambushed Omar Garcia Harfuch, the head of Mexico City's entire public security force. In broad daylight, in the middle of the city, using grenades and high-powered rifles. Harfouche survived. 2 of his bodyguards didn't. A civilian was also killed in the attack. Think about the message that sends. This isn't attacking a police convoy in a rural mountain road. This is walking into the most heavily surveilled, most policed city in Mexico and trying to kill the top cop with grenades on a public street. It was a signal that El Mencho could reach anywhere, hit anyone, at any time. And nobody could touch him. By this point, CJNG had surpassed the Sinaloa cartel in territorial reach. They had operations in almost all 50 U.S. states. The DEA considered them as powerful as Sinaloa. And given that Sinaloa was being torn apart by internal warfare after El Mayo's arrest in 2024, some analysts argued CJNG had become the most powerful drug trafficking organization on Earth. And El Mencho, the man running all of it, was still a ghost, still hiding somewhere in the mountains of Jalisco with his kidney disease and his $15 million bounty and his army of sicarios keeping the world away. The DEA had literally put up billboards across Southern California with his face on them, offering $10 million, later increased to $15 million, for anyone who could give them information, leading to his arrest. $15 million. That's life-changing money for almost anyone on Earth. And still, nobody collected. Either nobody knew where he was, or, more likely, anyone who did know understood exactly what happened to people who talked. His family was getting picked off one by one, though. His son El Menchito had been arrested in Mexico back in 2014. His daughter Jessica Johanna got arrested in Washington, D.C. in 2020 when she came to visit her brother after his extradition. His wife Rosalinda was arrested in Jalisco in November 2021. His brother Antonio got caught in an army raid in Guadalajara in 2022. His other brother Abraham was recaptured in February 2025. His son-in-law faked his own death to escape Mexico, hid in a mansion in Riverside, California, and still got caught in November 2024. Every person close to him was falling, everyone except him, until they found his girlfriend. This is where the story comes full circle, and the details of how it went down are wild. Military intelligence had been running long-term surveillance on El Mencho's inner circle for months. Not on El Mencho directly, because they couldn't find him, but on the people around him, his associates, his family, the people he trusted. And specifically, they were tracking a trusted associate who was connected to a woman El Mencho had been seeing romantically since separating from his wife Rosalinda in 2018. On February 20th, 2026, surveillance data showed that this associate had transported El Mencho's romantic partner to a secluded rural property in the mountainous region near Tapalpa, Jalisco. Security forces confirmed that this woman had a face-to-face meeting with someone at that location. Then she left. On February 21st, she departed the property. But El Mencho was still there. They had him. After a decade of hunting, after the helicopter, after $15 million in reward money, after everything. The most wanted man in Mexico was located because of surveillance on a woman visiting a remote property in the mountains. The military moved immediately. Early Sunday morning on February 22, 2026, 3 coordinated elements launched simultaneously. An airmobile unit came in with 6 helicopters. Air cover was provided by aircraft, with the U.S. later confirming they had provided intelligence support and aerial assets to assist. And on the ground, Army Special Forces units moved in to surround the compound. The confrontation was immediate. The second the military reached the compound, CJNG gunmen opened fire, heavy fire. El Mencho and his inner security detail bolted from the main structure and ran directly into the dense forest surrounding the property. Special forces split off from the main group and pursued them into the brush, establishing a perimeter and tracking them through the trees. El Mencho was 59 years old. He had kidney disease. He had been hiding for years, and when the soldiers came, he ran. He didn't surrender. He ran into the forest with his bodyguards and tried to escape through the mountains he'd been hiding in for years. He almost made it. In the firefight that broke out during the pursuit through the forest, cartel gunmen struck a military helicopter that was providing aerial support, forcing it to make an emergency landing in nearby Sayula. In his final moments, surrounded by soldiers closing in, CJNG was still shooting down military aircraft. The same tactic they used in 2015, right up until the end. But the soldiers got to him. In the ensuing firefight in the forest, El Mencho was shot. 2 of his bodyguards were also hit. When the area was secured and military medics reached him, they realized immediately how serious his wounds were. He needed emergency medical care fast. Security forces called in a helicopter to evacuate El Mencho, the 2 injured bodyguards, and a wounded soldier to Guadalajara for treatment. They loaded him up. They got airborne. And somewhere during that flight, the most feared man in Mexico, shot in the mountains by the army he'd been fighting for over a decade, died. His 2 bodyguards died with him. He didn't go out in a dramatic last stand. He didn't get to die a legend in the field. He was shot, picked up by the military's own helicopter, and bled out on the way to the hospital. The Mexican government, concerned about violent CJNG retaliation if they landed in Guadalajara, diverted the aircraft to Morelia International Airport instead, where an Air Force plane was waiting to transport the bodies to Mexico City for official identification. Nemesio El Mencho Oseguera Cervantes, the man who shot down military helicopters, massacred police officers, and tried to assassinate the head of Mexico City's police force in broad daylight, died as a prisoner of the very army he spent his entire career trying to destroy. The second the news broke, Mexico went to war with itself. CJNG activated every cell, every regional commander. Within hours of El Mencho's death being confirmed, the response was unlike anything Mexico had seen since the cartel's peak days. 85 blockades on federal highways, stretching from Baja California in the north all the way down to Oaxaca in the south. Criminal groups in cartel-controlled territory dragged trucks and buses onto major roads and set them on fire. 27 direct attacks on security forces were recorded. In Jalisco alone, 25 members of the National Guard were killed in the violence that followed. On the cartel side, 30 CJNG operatives were killed in Jalisco, with 4 more in Michoacan. Guadalajara, Mexico's second-largest city and a host city for the 2026 FIFA World Cup, which was just months away, turned into a ghost town. Citizens locked their doors and stayed inside. Public transportation was suspended, bus routes, metro lines, everything halted. Smoke was visible across the city's skyline from burning vehicles. Videos circulated on social media showing suspected CJNG members setting a gas station on fire while people filmed from their windows. The federal government deployed an additional 2,500 Special Forces troops to the region, reinforcing the 7,000 already stationed in Jalisco. That's nearly 10,000 military personnel in one state trying to contain the fallout from one man's death. And here's the part that really tells you how much this operation mattered on an international level. The White House got involved. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirmed that the United States had provided intelligence support to the Mexican government specifically for this operation. She said President Trump had been very clear that the U.S. would ensure narco-terrorists sending deadly drugs into the country would face justice. The U.S. Embassy in Mexico confirmed on X that the operation was carried out by Mexican Special Forces within the framework of bilateral cooperation with American intelligence, providing complementary information. This wasn't just Mexico's win. This was a joint operation. American intelligence helped locate, track, and ultimately end El Mencho, the same country where he once did federal prison time for heroin trafficking in California in 1994, ultimately played a role in his death 32 years later. Here's the uncomfortable truth that analysts are already raising. Killing El Mencho might have ended the man, but it didn't end the organization. Mexico City-based security consultant David Saucedo was blunt about it when speaking to CNN. El Mencho's son, known as El Menchito, had been serving a life sentence plus 30 years in a U.S. federal prison since March 2025. His wife Rosalinda had been arrested in Mexico in 2021. His brother-in-laws, who ran the financial arm of the cartel through a group called Los Cuinas, were either arrested or serving time in the U.S. The line of succession, Saucedo said, has been broken. There's no clear family heir, no obvious next leader who commands the loyalty of the entire organization. And that's actually the scariest part of this story. One analyst put it perfectly to Al Jazeera. Removing El Mencho is like saying a company is going to fail because you fired the CEO. The drugs don't stop moving. The roots don't disappear. The infrastructure that generates billions of dollars a year doesn't just evaporate because one man is dead. What happens instead is a power struggle. Multiple regional commanders, each believing they should be the one to step up. Each with their own loyal soldiers, each willing to use violence to consolidate control. And when cartels fight each other for internal dominance, it's always the civilians who pay the price. Experts are already pointing to El Mencho's stepson, Juan Carlos González Valencia, who reportedly oversees the cartel's paramilitary wing, as a possible successor. But if he can't consolidate control quickly, analysts warn that CJNG could splinter into multiple factions, and a fragmented CJNG competing violently for territory, especially with a weakened Sinaloa cartel also fighting its own internal battles after El Mayo's arrest, from miles, could push Mexico's already strained security situation to record levels of violence. There's also a historical lesson here that critics of the Mexican government's approach are already raising. When Felipe Calderón ran his military-led cartel decapitation strategy from 2006 to 2012, he killed or captured dozens of cartel leaders. And what happened? The cartels didn't die. They multiplied, they fragmented, they adapted. The CJNG itself is a direct product of that era, born from the collapse of the Milenio cartel after its leadership was taken out. Killing El Mencho might have just created the conditions for the next El Mencho to rise. Step back from the politics and the law enforcement wins for a second, and just look at what this war actually cost. El Mencho spent over 15 years running an organization that fundamentally changed what was possible in Mexico's criminal underworld. Before CJNG, no cartel had successfully shot down a military helicopter with a rocket launcher. Before CJNG, no cartel had attempted to assassinate the head of Mexico City's police force with grenades in broad daylight. Before CJNG, the idea of a drug trafficking organization that operated like a military, with armored vehicles, drone bombs, landmines, and RPG launchers, was unthinkable. El Mencho made all of it normal. When the military raided his compound on February 22, 2026, they seized armored vehicles and weaponry that included rocket launchers specifically capable of shooting down aircraft and destroying armored vehicles. In his final firefight, they shot down another military helicopter. The same playbook, right to the end. A decade after 2015, CJNG was still fighting the Mexican military with the same tactics, the same weapons, the same willingness to escalate beyond what any government expected. The war between CJNG and the Mexican military was never really about drugs. It was about power, and about who controls the terms of engagement in a country where the government and organized crime have been locked in a brutal, decades-long war for sovereignty over entire regions. El Mencho bet that if he made himself expensive enough to target, If every operation against him came with a price in soldiers' lives and burned cities, the government would eventually leave him alone. He was almost right. For a decade, he was right. They couldn't touch him. But on a Sunday morning in February 2026, with 6 helicopters and special forces on the ground and American intelligence in the loop, they finally found the one thing that could locate him: a woman visiting his hideout in the mountains. The most feared man in Mexico, killed by a surveillance operation that tracked his romantic partner to a rural property. Shot in a forest while trying to run. Dying on the military's own helicopter while being flown to the hospital they never reached. The war is over. The man who started it is dead. But in Mexico, the violence doesn't end when the leaders do. It just changes shape. And whatever CJNG becomes next, whoever rises from the wreckage of El Mencho's empire, the playbook he wrote is still out there. The weapons are still out there. The roots, the money, the infrastructure, all of it is still running. The Mexican government got their biggest win in years on February 22nd, 2026. But the war? The war is just entering its next chapter. And if history tells us anything, if the lessons of every cartel boss who came before El Mencho mean anything, the next chapter is going to be brutal. Because in Mexico, power vacuums don't stay empty. They fill up with blood. And somewhere out there right now, the next leader of CJNG is already making their move, already calculating who to eliminate, already figuring out how to consolidate an empire worth $50 billion before anyone else gets to it first. El Mencho built his legacy on the belief that the government couldn't stop him. For over a decade, he was right. And in that decade, he proved something that no cartel boss before him had proven: that a drug trafficking organization could fight a government's military on near equal terms and survive. He normalized a level of cartel violence and state confrontation that Mexico had never seen. Whatever comes next from the ashes of his organization will carry that DNA. That's the real legacy of El Mencho and the CJNG's war with the Mexican military. Not the death toll, not the helicopters, not the $15 million bounty. The real legacy is that he showed everyone who comes after him exactly how far you can push it. And in a country where organized crime has been rewriting its own rules for decades, that lesson doesn't die with the man who taught it.